You're listening to the CyberWire Network, powered by N2K.
Our sponsor, Collide, has some big news. If you're an Okta user, they can get your entire fleet up to 100% compliance. How? If a device isn't compliant, the user can't log into your cloud apps until they fix the problem. It's that simple. Without Collide, IT struggles to solve basic problems, like ensuring everyone's OS and browser are up to date. Unsecure devices log into your company's apps with no problems because there's nothing there to stop them. But Collide works seamlessly with Okta to enforce compliance as part of authentication and complete the Zero Trust security puzzle. Visit collide.com/CyberWire Daily to learn more or book a demo. That's KOLIDE.com/CyberWire Daily. The White House releases its US National Cybersecurity Strategy. Red teaming critical infrastructure. Redis cryptojacker has been discovered. Russia bans several messaging apps. Our guest is Kapil Raina from CrowdStrike with the latest on threat hunting. Dinah Davis from Arctic Wolf on the top healthcare industry cyber attacks. And hacktivist auxiliaries continue their nuisance-level activities. From the CyberWire studios at Data Tribe, I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire summary for Thursday, March 2nd, 2023. The White House this morning released its long-awaited, much-anticipated National Cybersecurity Strategy. The strategy's intention, the White House explained, is to secure the full benefits of a safe and secure digital ecosystem for all Americans. The White House shared that two primary goals of the strategy are to rebalance the responsibility to defend cyberspace by shifting the burden of cybersecurity away from individuals and onto specialized organizations in the sector, as well as to realign incentives to favor long-term investments by balancing threat defense with smart planning and investment. The strategy is planned to prioritize ease and effectiveness of cybersecurity implementation, quick recovery from incidents, and reinforcement of digital values in 3 points highlighted by the administration: defensibility, resiliency, and values alignment. The strategy has 5 core tenets: defend critical infrastructure, disrupt and dismantle threat actors, shape market forces to drive security and resilience, invest in a resilient future, and forge international partnerships to pursue shared goals. The Wall Street Journal makes an interesting point in noting that this strategy has a much wider lens than the government seems to have used in recent years. Sectors such as oil and gas pipelines, as well as federal agencies, have been brought into focus on a much smaller scale by the federal government in yesteryear, the journal writes. The Washington Post makes note of the way the strategy also brings to light the role of U.S.-based services in foreign cyber attacks. The strategy identifies the ways foreign threat actors exploit U.S.-based cloud infrastructure, saying, often these services are leased through foreign resellers who have multiple degrees of separation from their U.S.-based providers, hindering the ability of those providers to address abuse complaints or respond to legal process from U.S. authorities. The Post also notes the strategy's inclusion of 4 other initiatives: a potential approach to a federal cybersecurity insurance response in times of catastrophe, the slow adoption of IPv6, the White House's much-needed legislative assistance, and early steps in the development of a strategy implementation plan. We'll be attending a press session this afternoon in which the administration will offer more perspective on the strategy, and we'll follow the story up tomorrow. CISA has published the findings of a red team assessment the agency carried out against a large critical infrastructure organization last year. The operation, conducted at the request of the organization, lasted 3 months. The Red team was able to gain access to 2 workstations via spear phishing attacks. The team was also able to move laterally within the network, but were unable to gain access to the organization's sensitive business systems after running up against multi-factor authentication measures and time constraints. However, CISA believes that by using secure shell session socket files, they could have accessed any hosts available to the users whose workstations were compromised. Cryptojacking is back. Of course, it's never really been away, but there's a new threat actor giving the technique a bit of a surge. Cato security researchers shared in a blog this morning their discovery of a campaign targeting insecure Redis deployments for cryptojacking. The campaign leverages open-source command line file transfer service transfer.sh, which has seen activity since at least 2014. The service, however, didn't see any malware distribution until researchers noticed it early this year. The Cato team suspects that the move to the file transfer service may represent an attempt to evade detection. Russia's internet watchdog Roskomnadzor has banned 9 foreign messaging apps, computing reports. Roskomnadzor's statement singles out the apps as being foreign-owned and as providing a way for users to communicate directly with one another. The sender determines the recipient of the message with no possibility for public mediation of the content, and this direct, unmediated communication seems to be the more troubling aspect of the services. As Computing points out, other foreign-owned apps like Zoom remain acceptable. Roskomnadzor's statement makes no specific accusation of subversion or direct complicity with anti-Russian forces, as had marked earlier bans on Facebook and Instagram. The apps that fall under the new restrictions include Discord, Microsoft Teams, Skype for Business, Snapchat, Telegram, Threema, Viber, WhatsApp, and WeChat. And finally, to turn specifically to Russia's war against Ukraine, there have been no reports of major cyber attacks in recent days, but hacktivists have remained active. The U.S. consulate in Milan, for example, had its Twitter account hijacked last week on February 27th, and the attackers used it to disseminate tweets associating Ukraine's government with Nazis, flags, swastikas, and so on, the usual shtick. The State Department regained control of the account, but Newsweek reports not before the pro-Russian hacktivist tweets achieved about 140,000 views. Sure, those aren't really even teenage influencer numbers, but the hijacking has to be dealt with in any case. The State Department explained, with what must have been the organizational equivalent of a weary sigh, that the U.S. remained committed to its support of Ukraine, and that no, Foggy Bottom doesn't think that Kyiv is some kind of nest of Nazis. Coming up after the break, Dinah Davis from Arctic Wolf on the top healthcare industry cyber attacks. Our guest is Kapil Raina from CrowdStrike with the latest on threat hunting. Stay with us. Are you laser-focused on protecting the data inside your company's network? What about the executive and employee data outside your network? Like exposed personal information that's just out there on the surface web, waiting for a bad actor to use it to launch a highly personalized phishing scheme that brings down your network. Specifically designed for the enterprise, Delete Me for Business makes it simple to implement and scale a proactive privacy protection program at your company. Delete Me continuously finds and removes personal data from online sources. Why risk your employees' personal data being used against your company? Delete it today with Delete Me. Visit joindeleteme.com/cyberwire to learn more. That's joindeleteme.com/cyberwire. Struggling to keep up with the demands of managing and securing identity in your distributed enterprise IT environment? You're not alone, but don't let it hold you back. With Strata's identity orchestration platform, you can secure all your apps on any cloud with any IDP, so your IT teams will never have to refactor for identity again. Imagine modernizing app identity in minutes instead of months, deploying passwordless on any tricky old app, and achieving business resilience with always-on identity, all from one lightweight and flexible platform. Want to see it in action? Share your identity challenge with Strata on a discovery call, and they'll hook you up with a complimentary pair of AirPods Pro. So don't miss out. Visit strata.io/cyberwire. That's strata.io/cyberwire. Security firm CrowdStrike recently shared their 2022 Falcon Overwatch threat hunting report, tracking the evolving adversary activity and tradecraft over the past 12 months. Kapil Raina is Vice President of Zero Trust Marketing and Identity Evangelist at CrowdStrike.
Identity and the breach of identity, and especially identity-related attacks, has become a key element of most adversaries' arsenal. And this could be things like, privilege escalation, lateral movement, things like that. So identity and the breach of identity has become so instrumental in many of the adversary attacks. So we've seen that kind of progress more so over the last year or two, and more dramatically. And so that's definitely one key trend that we're definitely seeing.
One of the things that you all highlighted here was that the bad guys are shifting some of their tactics here. You saw, particularly you highlighted phishing. What are you all tracking there?
When we think about phishing, what we've seen is that, again, this is a pattern that's building, is sort of targeted phishing is becoming more prevalent, right? So rather than kind of the generic spray and pray, that's definitely a pattern that we've seen, again, developing not just this last year, but over the last few years. We have definitely seen more sophisticated attacks where because they're more targeted, that, for example, the communication within that phishing content is a little bit more crafted. We've also seen now shifts to acknowledging the fact that a number of organizations have, let's say, multi-factor authentication. And so kind of factoring that into the attack techniques in terms of, essentially tricking someone to try and approve an MFA, for example.
Well, based on the information that you all have gathered here, what are your recommendations for organizations to best defend themselves?
So if you look at, there's a couple of ways to look at it. If you, for example, prescribe to the MITRE attack framework, right, that's a great way to look and kind of lay out the attack techniques that a typical organization might face. And if you look at sort of a heat map, if you will, of where, for example, where our Overwatch team sees many of the threats, you'll see, again, as I alluded to earlier, that identity tends to be a key area. So if you can address and mitigate identity-related attacks, you can address, you may not be able to stop every single threat, but you can at least mitigate the threat so it doesn't continue. So, for example, protecting your identity infrastructure. This includes things like Active Directory and domain controllers. Preventing certain legacy protocols from being used, for example, that could be breached. Preventing certain types of access to domain controllers that shouldn't be allowed. Looking at behavioral analytics in terms of how things access this infrastructure. So that's one example. Another example is looking at the credentials themselves. Since many of these attacks eventually compromise a legitimate credential, then the question is, okay, has an adversary taken over a legitimate credential, right? Has someone taken over, for example, Dave's access to your system? And so there we recommend looking at real-time information about credentials, how they're used, where they're used, whether they're for human credentials or even for other applications like service accounts there as well. So, for example, we've seen typically, our own research has shown typically an organization will have anywhere from, I would say, about 25% or so of their accounts, or what we consider stale accounts. These are accounts that were given a certain set of privileges and permissions, but were not actually accessed over typically anywhere from 30 to 90 days. And why that's important is because over time, that creates a bigger attack vector that you're not watching. And so really tightening those controls, looking at real-time analysis. The other area also to ensure that you really look at, as we kind of looked at all these different attacks, is about 25% or so of attacks, or entry points or attacks into an organization will come from an unmanaged system. These are systems, for example, from your supply chain network or contractor, where you physically can't touch that device. And so in that case, again, typically if a supplier or contractor is working within your environment, you're giving them a credential. So looking at identity-based analysis of how that credential is being used and then giving a risk score around it so you can real-time intercept potential risky behavior, even if that system is not managed, which is super critical, especially in this day and age. And the last thing I would tell you is identity is not restricted to just an endpoint, for example, but it's also something that we'll see in cloud as well. If you look at the cloud environments and the attacks there's a number of challenges that you would have on-prem that you have in cloud. So, for example, Microsoft, there was a recent disclosure that Microsoft AD Azure, Active Directory Azure system had a number of issues. So, looking at cloud holistically as you do, for example, endpoint or anything else is super important. And then the final thing is, if you're using IT infrastructure, it's always best to have it protected by a vendor that really, or organization that focuses on security.
That's Kapil Raina from CrowdStrike. And joining me once again is Dinah Davis. She is the VP of R&D Operations at Arctic Wolf. Dinah, it's great to have you back. I saw you and your colleagues over there at Arctic Wolf recently published a report just tracking some of the attacks on healthcare industry representatives there. Can we go through some of the ones here that caught your attention?
Yeah. So it's like the top 12 healthcare industry attacks of all time, right? So I thought we would go through the top 4 because, those are going to be the most interesting, really.
Right. In the time we have.
I thought maybe not 12. Yeah. So the average cost of a healthcare breach in the US is $10.1 million. And that number, that amount has already increased 41% in just 2 years, right? And from what we're seeing, the healthcare industry has the highest average cost of a breach 12 years running. So out of all the breaches that happen, it tends to be the most negatively impactful on healthcare organizations. So if we take a look here at the top 4, we can see how they kind of get attacked, the cost of that, how many people were affected, that kind of thing. So the top 4, so we're going in like David Letterman order here. Starting at
number 4.
Starting at number 4 was the Excelis Health Plan Incorporated, and it was a malware attack, and it cost $17.3 million with 10 million people affected. So basically, they released names, date of birth, social insurance, all of that kind of stuff. And although the affected data was encrypted, the hackers gained access to the administrative controls, making that encryption moot. So not cool. Not cool on that.
Yeah.
Number 3, Primera Blue Cross. So this was a phishing attack. Quite common that we see that. It costs quite a bit more than the last one, $74 million. With 11 million people affected, right? And so this was a phishing email to a Primera employee. The email included a link to download a document, and that document contained malware. So once the document was clicked, hackers were able to access the services, and even worse, the breach wasn't detected for 8 months.
Wow.
Yeah, so not cool. Not cool. All right. Number 2, American Medical Collection Agency. So it's actually this is a company that collects money on behalf of medical businesses and stuff like that.
Right. These are the folks they send after you if you do not or cannot pay your bill.
Yeah. So they're, fun people. Okay. But anyway, it was hacked through the online payment portal that they used. It cost $21 million. And then it affected 21 million people. So this one affected more people, cost a little less, but affected more people than the Premera Blue Cross.
So there was some vulnerability in the web page itself?
Yeah, in the third party supply chain attack, essentially. In the third party tool they were using to do like the payments and make the payments happen. Yeah, so there was an issue with the third party payment tool that they were using to collect the payments, and that was able to be hacked. So they have since changed providers. They have a lot more strict rules around it, but definitely not cool. Okay, finally, the number one. Okay, Anthem. So this was also a phishing/malware attack. It cost $115 million, and
wow.
78 million people were affected. Basically, the attackers accessed a corporate database with a phishing email and stole nearly 79 million records containing patient and employee data. It's the largest healthcare industry cyber attack in history. I think that one actually happened like in 2012 as well. I don't have the information in front of me, but it happened a while ago. So hopefully that means, a lot of these organizations are getting smarter, are paying more attention to what they need to do to keep their patients' data safe. I mean, we even just recently saw Sick Kids Toronto get attacked.
Right.
And interestingly, the attackers gave the decryption key back for free. Probably not out of the goodness of their heart, though. Probably more because that was drawing a little too much attention to attack, this really important hospital for sick children, most of whom have cancer. It's pretty evil, but nice to see they gave it back anyway. But I think things are, a lot of companies are putting a lot more effort into their defenses.
It's such an interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, on the one hand, you would hope that there were some kind of set of norms where these were not organizations that would get hit for the reasons you just described. These are life and death situations here. But the flip side of that is that these are the folks who their mission is about as critical as it gets. So they have to get up and running as quickly as possible. They're more likely to pay that ransom.
That's exactly it.
Whatever it is to get things going. And what a terrible tension there that exists between those two things.
Agreed.
Yeah. All right. Well, interesting stuff. Dinah Davis, thanks so much for joining us. And now, a word from our sponsor, SpyCloud, the cybercrime analytics leader. SpyCloud disrupts cybercrime by telling you what criminals know about your business and your customers, so you can take action to prevent ransomware, account takeover, and online fraud. SpyCloud constantly recaptures and analyzes new data from the criminal underground, including credentials, cookies, and PII siphoned from malware-infected devices. With knowledge of the specific data criminals have in hand from InfoStealer malware on managed and unmanaged devices, security teams can respond with a more efficient and effective process called post-infection remediation. Get SpyCloud's post-infection remediation guide outlining the 7 steps for preventing a malware infection from becoming a full-blown ransomware incident. Visit spycloud.com/cyberwire. That's spycloud.com/cyberwire. And we thank SpyCloud for sponsoring our show. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. The CyberWire podcast is a production of N2K Networks, proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. This episode was produced by Liz Irvin and senior producer Jennifer Iben. Our mixer is Trey Hester, with original music by Elliot Peltzman. The show was written by John Petrick. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. I'll be on vacation for the next week or so, and Trey Hester will be behind the mic. I hope you'll give him your kind attention. I'll see you back here in about a week. Thanks for listening. This episode is made possible in part by RSA Conference, where the world talks security. Through global events and year-round content, RSAC connects you to cybersecurity leaders and cutting-edge ideas for a safer, more secure future. Learn more at rsaconference.com/cyberwire23.